It's the Side Quest Podcast.
Right now, like sitting in a police evidence locker over in Hertfordshire, there's this massive three-dimensional sculpture of a human brain.
Yeah, the vape brain. It's quite a visual.
It really is. And if you look closely at the grooves and the lobes of this thing, you realize it is built entirely out of 28,000 brightly colored, candy-flavored illegal vapes.
Which is just staggering when you picture it.
Totally. And every single one of those was seized from local teenagers.
So, you are listening to The Deep Dive, and today we are looking at the reality of a device that is, it's probably sitting in your pocket right now or on your desk or in the hand of the person walking past you on the street.
Yeah, that sculpture is it's a visceral anchor for the conversation we really need to have today, because we're dealing with this huge paradox in modern public health. On one hand, you've got this tool that is undeniably pulling heavy adult smokers out of the grip of combustible tobacco, which is great.
Yeah, saving lives. Exactly. But then on the other side of the spectrum, you have a piece of tech that is fundamentally rewiring the neurological architecture of like an entire generation of kids.
I'm so glad you're here to walk us through this, because we have a massive stack of sources to get through today. We really need to unpack all of this.
We've got our work cut out for us, for sure.
We do. We're looking at clinical white papers on nicotine pathophysiology. We've got comprehensive medical reports from the American Lung Association. And these global legislative trackers mapping out the frantic new laws that governments are just pushing through right now.
And not to mention the on-the-ground reporting.
Right. We've got the startling report analyzing a devastating city center fire in Glasgow that took down an entire Victorian building. And of course, the implications behind that seized vape brain sculpture we just talked about.
The sheer volume of data is immense, but the through line connecting all of it is fascinating. We're basically watching a technology evolve way faster than the human body can adapt to it.
Let alone how fast governments can regulate it.
Oh, absolutely. The regulators are light years behind.
Okay, so let's unpack this. And I want to make our baseline super clear right up front for everyone listening. This conversation is not a judgment on vaping.
No, not at all.
We aren't here to wag our fingers or lecture anyone. Our mission today is pure scientific and historical exploration. We just want to help you understand exactly what is in your hands or your kids' hands or, the hands of your coworkers.
Because to really understand what the vape has become today, you actually have to understand why it was invented in the first place.
Right. And surprisingly, the story doesn't start in some sleek Silicon Valley tech incubator, does it?
Not even close. We actually have to go back almost a century.
A century? Wait, really?
Yeah. If we trace the patent lineage back, the earliest known schematic for a device that resembles an electronic cigarette belongs to an American named Joseph Robinson. He filed his patent in 1927.
1927. Wow. We're talking about the era of Calvin Coolidge. The Model T Ford was still on the road.
Yeah, it was a long time ago.
The idea of an electronic cigarette existing back then feels almost like sci-fi.
Well, to be fair, it was purely theoretical at that point. Robinson's idea was basically this mechanical device intended to vaporize medicinal compounds for respiratory ailments.
Which I guess was a pretty common medical practice back then.
It was, but the battery technology in the 1920s was just archaic. It was heavy, totally impractical for a handheld consumer device.
So it never actually got made.
Right, it was never manufactured. The true conceptual father of the device, the one that actually looks and functions like the fundamental model we know today, is a guy named Herbert A. Gilbert.
And from the sources, he wasn't a doctor or a tech guy, right?
No, he was a scrap metal dealer from Beaver Falls, Pennsylvania.
A scrap metal dealer inventing the vape. I love that detail so much. It's just such a distinctly mid-century American tinkerer kind of story. So what was his actual design?
So in 1963, Gilbert filed a patent for what he called a safe and harmless means for and method of smoking. He nicknamed his prototype the Smokeless. Yeah. And he figured out that you could use a small battery to heat a flavored liquid into a vapor that could be inhaled.
Okay, so that's the core mechanic right there.
Exactly. But the crucial differentiator in Gilbert's design is that his device used absolutely no tobacco. And even more importantly, no nicotine.
Wow. Yeah, I was reading through his original patent notes in the source material, and it struck me how innocent the whole concept was.
Very innocent.
He envisioned it purely as a cessation aid, like
Yeah.
just a way to replace the physical, tactile habit of smoking without introducing any chemical addiction whatsoever.
Right, the oral fixation aspect.
Yeah, and he was pitching flavors like mint, rum, and cinnamon. But here is where I get confused. In 1963, virtually everyone in America smoked. It was literally everywhere.
Ubiquitous.
So why wasn't this rum-flavored smokeless device sitting next to the cash register in every drugstore in the country?
Well, the timing was his ultimate downfall. He pitched the smokeless to several major chemical and tobacco companies at the time. They reviewed his prototypes, showed like a mild amount of interest, and then just quietly walked away.
That's killed it.
Yeah. The prevailing historical analysis suggests that the tobacco giants of the 1960s recognized the threat. They chose to simply wait out the expiration of his patent rather than actually license it.
Because commercializing it would be like a tacit admission of guilt, right?
Exactly.
I mean, if a major tobacco company suddenly releases a safe and harmless cigarette, they are implicitly admitting that their core multi-billion-dollar product, the traditional cigarette, is inherently unsafe.
You nailed it. And in 1963, the tobacco industry was still aggressively denying any link between smoking and lung cancer. They were fighting tooth and nail to obscure that science.
That is so dark.
It is. Gabert later stated in interviews that the only thing he ever got from his invention was the quiet personal satisfaction of believing that his core concept ultimately helped people decades later. He never saw a dime.
That is both incredibly tragic and beautifully altruistic at the same time. He walked away with nothing but the idea, so the concept just goes dormant for a while.
Yeah, it vanishes into the patent archives for decades.
When does it actually resurface with nicotine introduced to the equation?
We have to jump forward to 1979 for that. Enter Phil Ray. He was an early computing pioneer. He actually managed computer systems for the Apollo space program.
Oh, wow. From scrap metal to the Apollo program.
Right? Quite the leap. So Ray, along with his personal physician, Dr. Norman Jacobson, teamed up to build a commercial nicotine vapor device called the Favor cigarette.
Favor. Okay. And I assumed vaping was some modern marketing buzzword dreamed up by like an ad agency around 2012. But the sources note that Ray and Jacobson are the ones who officially coined the terms vaping and vapor.
Yeah, they wanted to distinguish their products' users from traditional smokers. They cemented the linguistic legacy decades before the Oxford Dictionary made vape the word of the year in 2014.
But the Favor cigarette didn't take off, did it?
No, it flopped commercially. I mean,
Right.
they managed to get it into major U.S. retailers,
Mm-hmm.
but the delivery mechanism just wasn't efficient enough. It couldn't provide that rapid nicotine spike that a heavy smoker's brain demands.
So the tech still wasn't quite there?
Not yet. The real technological breakthrough, the actual invention of the modern electronic cigarette as a viable, mass-market consumer product, that doesn't happen until the year 2000. And it happens in China.
And this is where the narrative shifts from just tinkering to, like, genuine emotional desperation. Because the inventor is a man named Han Leek, and his origin story has practically become consumer technology mythology at this point.
It really has. Han Lake is a Chinese pharmacist and an agricultural researcher. He was also a deeply addicted 2-pack-a-day smoker.
Oh, wow. 2 packs a day.
Yeah, heavy smoker. And the catalyst for his invention was intensely personal. He watched his own father suffer and die from smoking-induced lung cancer.
That is awful.
It was. Han Leek desperately wanted to quit. But the traditional cessation tools available at the time, the nicotine patch and the gum, were just completely failing him.
The story in the sources goes that in the year 2000, while he was struggling with the addiction and the grief of his father's death, he forgot to take off his nicotine patch before going to sleep.
Right, which is a big mistake.
Yeah, and the patch induced this incredibly vivid, terrifying nightmare. In the dream, he was drowning in a sea, he was sinking under the water, his lungs filling up, totally suffocating.
Which is horrifying.
But then, suddenly, the water around him miraculously turned into a breathable vapor, and he was saved.
It is an incredibly potent subconscious metaphor. Dreaming of drowning, the inability to draw breath, that's essentially the precise physical sensation of late-stage emphysema and lung cancer.
Right, it's his father's illness manifesting in his sleep.
Exactly. And that dream galvanized him. As a pharmacist, he understood the delivery mechanisms of drugs. So by 2003, he had developed and patented a piezoelectric mechanism to actualize that dream.
Let's break down that mechanism because it's fundamentally different from what we use today. If I remember my physics correctly, piezoelectricity involves applying an electrical charge to a specific type of crystal, which causes the crystal to physically deform and vibrate, right?
Yes, you're touching on the exact genius of his early design. Instead of using heat to boil the liquid, Hanluk used high-frequency ultrasonic vibration.
Oh, so no heat at all.
No heat. He ran a current through a piezoelectric element, causing it to oscillate thousands of times per second. That intense, microscopic shaking physically shattered the liquid nicotine solution into an inhalable mist.
That is brilliant.
It was an aerosol generated entirely without combustion or high heat boiling.
And he was working for a company called the Golden Dragon Holding Group at the time, right? And they recognized the massive potential of this device immediately.
They absolutely did. They even changed their name to Ruyan, which translates roughly to, like, smoke. It's very fitting. They launched it commercially in China in 2004, and it was a massive domestic sensation. Then, by around 2006 and 2007, these devices started crossing borders into Europe and the United States.
And that global expansion right there basically set the stage for the public health crisis we are currently navigating.
It was the spark, yeah.
Looking at this history, the tragic irony is overwhelming. I was thinking about this when reviewing the sources, and Han reminds me so much of Alfred Nobel.
Oh, the dynamite inventor. That's a great comparison.
Right. Nobel invented dynamite with the purest intentions. He wanted to make mining and construction safer to prevent the horrific accidental explosions that were killing workers handling unstable liquid nitroglycerin. He just wanted to save lives.
About that.
But almost instantly, his invention was co-opted by militaries and became a devastating tool of mass destruction. He was so horrified by what he had unleashed that he founded the Nobel Peace Prize to try and, balance his karma.
The guilt must have been immense.
Exactly. And Han invented his device for the exact same reason, to save people from the agonizing lung cancer that killed his father. He created a pure harm reduction tool for sick adults. Yet, look at what his invention has morphed into today.
Yeah?
It has become the sleek, brightly colored, heavily marketed, ultra-addictive product that is actively targeting a demographic and teenagers who never even smoked in the first place.
The Nobel analogy holds up perfectly when you look at how the technology evolved. The physical evolution of the device perfectly mirrors the aggressive evolution of the addiction itself.
Yeah.
It started as harm reduction, but the engineering quickly became far too efficient.
Let's dig into that engineering leap. Because early vapes, the ones Han made, were not particularly popular with kids. What changed?
Okay, so the early Western e-cigarettes, the ones dominating the market from around 2008 to 2014, they were colloquially known as cigalikes.
Oh, right. The ones you used to buy at the gas station that looked exactly like a real cigarette.
Exactly. They were heavily engineered to mimic the visual and tactile experience of a traditional cigarette, complete with a little glowing LED tip when you inhaled. But the crucial factor, chemically, is that they used freebase nicotine in their liquid.
Freebase nicotine, what does that mean exactly?
Freebase nicotine is the purest form of the chemical, but it is highly alkaline. It has a very high pH level.
And a high pH means it's extremely harsh on human tissue, right?
Yes. If you try to inhale a high concentration of freebase nicotine, it burns the back of your throat terribly. It induces coughing, severe irritation. That harsh throat hit acts as a natural biological limiter.
Your body is basically fighting back.
Exactly. Your body physically prevents you from consuming massive amounts of it quickly. You simply can't chain vape high-strength freebase nicotine without experiencing extreme discomfort.
So the chemistry itself was kind of self-regulating the user's intake?
Right. But then the disruptors arrived.
Here we go.
In 2015, the market was violently transformed by a company called Juul. They abandoned that Ciga-like design entirely. They introduced this sleek, minimalist device that looked like a USB flash drive.
Oh, I remember. Suddenly everyone had a USB drive in their mouth.
Yeah, but their true disruption wasn't aesthetic, it was chemical. Juul introduced nicotine salts to the mass market.
I was reading the chemical breakdown of this in the sources. A nicotine salt is created by taking that harsh freebase nicotine and compounding it with an organic acid. I think the most common one is benzoic acid, right?
That's the one.
So if I remember my basic high school chemistry, introducing an acid to an alkaline base lowers the overall pH of the solution.
You're neutralizing the alkalinity.
Mm.
By protonating the nicotine molecule with benzoic acid, they dramatically lowered the pH of the aerosol. And the result is a chemical compound that is absorbed into the bloodstream even faster than freebase nicotine, but goes down the throat with almost zero irritation.
Wow, so they completely removed the biological limiter.
They erased the throat burn. Nicotine salts allow a user to inhale massive, unprecedented doses of nicotine smoothly and comfortably. That chemical tweak changed the entire trajectory of the industry.
That's terrifying.
It is, because suddenly a single tiny pod could deliver the nicotine equivalent of a full pack of traditional cigarettes without any of the harshness that historically discouraged overuse, especially among new, young users.
And that innovation paved the way for what we have now. Because from 2019 onward, we saw the explosion of disposable vapes. Brands like Elf Bar and Geek Bar just flooded the market.
Yep, they took that smooth nicotine salt technology and packaged it into ultra-cheap, brightly colored pre-filled devices layered with synthetic, hyper-sweet flavors.
So we've established the origin and the chemical evolution. Let's look at the literal mechanics of what is happening when someone uses one of these devices. Because the difference between a burning tobacco leaf and a boiling synthetic liquid is the entire foundation of the current medical debate.
It really is. It boils down, pun totally intended to, a single thermodynamic distinction. Uncontrolled combustion versus controlled aerosolization.
Let's start with combustion.
To truly understand the impact of a vape, you have to establish the baseline devastation of a cigarette. When you light a traditional tobacco cigarette with a match, you are initiating a violent, uncontrolled exothermic chemical reaction.
You're essentially starting a miniature localized bonfire an inch from your face.
That is scientifically accurate. The glowing tip of a resting cigarette sits at roughly 600 degrees Celsius. But when a smoker actively takes a drag, they pull ambient oxygen directly through the cherry, fueling the fire.
Like blowing on coals.
Exactly. And the temperature instantaneously spikes to upwards of 900 degrees Celsius, which is over 1600 degrees Fahrenheit.
That is an insane amount of heat to be introducing to your mouth and lungs.
And that extreme heat does terrible things to organic matter. It doesn't just gently release the naturally occurring nicotine. The heat fundamentally tears apart and mutates the cellular matrix of the tobacco leaf, the chemical additives the manufacturer put in, and the paper wrapper itself.
It just destroys everything.
Right. And this violent destruction results in what chemists call incomplete combustion. Incomplete combustion produces a dense, highly toxic slurry of heating gases and microscopic, solid carbonaceous particulate matter.
Okay.
That slurry is what we casually call smoke.
And the sources note that comprehensive chemical characterizations using gas chromatography have revealed that traditional tobacco smoke contains over 7,000 distinct chemical compounds. It's just a toxic chemical soup.
And the toxicity of that soup is staggering. Within that profile of 7,000 compounds, public health bodies have confirmed a minimum of 69 high-potency human carcinogens.
69 known causes of cancer in one puff.
Yeah, but the primary drivers of systemic mortality, the things that actually kill the majority of smokers, are twofold. First, you have tar.
Tar always sounds like such a generic term, like something you pave a road with. What is it biologically?
Tar is the collective term for the sticky, viscous, brown, resinous particulate matter that is left behind after the tobacco burns. When inhaled, it coats the mucosal linings of your entire bronchial tree.
Ugh, that sounds awful.
It gets worse. Your lungs have these tiny, hair-like structures called cilia. They naturally sweep back and forth to clear out dust and mucus. The tar literally paralyzes and destroys those cilia.
Oh, the cleaning crew is completely taken out.
Completely.
Yeah.
And once the cleaning mechanism is broken, the toxins just sit there directly on the delicate epithelial cells of your lungs, mutating their DNA over time, which is the primary catalyst for pulmonary carcinoma's lung cancer.
Okay, so that's the tar. And the second massive driver of mortality mentioned in the sources is carbon monoxide.
Right. Carbon monoxide is an incredibly insidious byproduct of combustion because it's a colorless, odorless, and highly toxic gas. When a smoker inhales it, the gas diffuses instantly across the alveolar membrane in the lungs and enters the bloodstream.
And that's where it attacks the red blood cells.
Exactly. It encounters your hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is the protein in your red blood cells responsible for carrying oxygen from your lungs to the rest of your body. But here is the terrifying biochemical reality. Carbon monoxide binds to human hemoglobin with an affinity roughly 200 times greater than oxygen.
Wait, let me visualize this for a second. It's like a game of musical chairs in your bloodstream, and carbon monoxide is 200 times stronger than oxygen, so it aggressively shoves the oxygen out of the seat and takes its place.
That is precisely the mechanism. It actively displaces oxygen, forming a compound called carboxyhemoglobin. Furthermore, the presence of carbon monoxide changes the structural shape of the hemoglobin molecule, making it grip whatever oxygen it does manage to hold on to even tighter.
So it won't let the oxygen go where it needs to go.
Right, it refuses to release it into your tissues. This forces the smoker's entire body into a state of chronic systemic hypoxia, meaning cellular oxygen starvation.
Oh my God.
So the heart has to pump much harder and faster just to deliver a baseline amount of oxygen, placing extreme, constant mechanical stress on the entire cardiovascular system, which leads directly to heart attacks and strokes.
Okay, so that is the baseline of combustible smoking. It is total multi-front biochemical warfare on the human body. Now contrast that with the physical mechanics of a modern vape. How is it different?
Well, a vape completely bypasses combustion. There is no fire, no glowing cherry, no burning paper. Instead, a lithium-ion battery sends a precisely controlled electrical current through a metallic heating element known as the coil.
And the coil is made of what exactly?
It's typically made of resistance wire like kanthal, nickel chromium, or stainless steel. The wire is tightly wrapped around an absorbent wick, usually made of organic unbleached cotton, which is saturated with the e-liquid.
Okay.
When the current hits the coil, it heats the saturated cotton to a tightly regulated boiling point, usually between 180 and 250 degrees Celsius.
So we are talking about a process of boiling, not burning. We are maxing out at 250 degrees Celsius instead of the 900 degrees Celsius of a cigarette.
Exactly. And that temperature differential changes the entire output. The heat converts the liquid into an aerosol. It's vital to understand that an aerosol is structurally and chemically completely different from smoke.
Right, because smoke has solid particles in it.
Yes, smoke contains solid, burning particulate matter. An aerosol consists of microscopic liquid droplets suspended within a gas carrier. Because you aren't burning organic matter, the chemical complexity of the output drops precipitously. You are inhaling dozens to hundreds of compounds rather than 7,000.
Okay, so let's break down the actual recipe of that e-liquid. What exactly is soaking into that cotton wick?
The base carrier fluid is almost universally a proprietary mixture of propylene glycol, known as PG, and vegetable glycerin, known as VG.
PG and VG.
Right. These are clear, viscous, slightly sweet liquid excipients. Their job is simply to hold the nicotine and the flavorings in suspension and create the visible vapor cloud when it's heated.
The American Lung Association white paper specifically notes that both PG and VG are designated by the FDA as generally recognized as safe for eating. Like they are ubiquitous food additives. You'll find them in cake mixes, ice cream, salad dressings.
And that designation is heavily exploited by vape marketers. But it requires massive context. They are safe for ingestion.
Eating them.
Eating them, yes. Your gastrointestinal tract is a robust, highly acidic environment built over millions of years of evolution to break down complex foreign chemical structures. The delicate single-cell thick air sacs of your lungs do not have an acidic stomach environment.
So you can't just assume what goes in the stomach can go in the lungs.
Absolutely not. Their safety profile is entirely different when you subject PG and VG to thermal vaporization and chronic deep lung inhalation. We are introducing food-grade chemicals into a respiratory organ, which is biologically uncharted territory. To that PG and VG base, manufacturers add the active ingredient, the nicotine salts we discussed earlier, and a complex blend of synthetic chemical flavorings to mask the chemical taste.
Okay, so taking all this mechanical and clinical data into account, what is the impartial medical consensus on the harm reduction aspect? Because the public messaging is incredibly fractured right now.
It really is confusing for people.
Yeah, you have health boards saying it saves lives, and then you have news reports saying it's a deadly epidemic. If we strip away the emotion, is vaping safer than smoking?
Okay, if we are talking strictly about an existing heavily addicted adult smoker, the clinical consensus, and this is supported by major institutions like the UK Health Security Agency and the Royal College of Physicians, is that vaping is roughly 95% less harmful than smoking traditional combustible cigarettes.
95% less harmful. That is a staggering toxicological victory.
It's a massive reduction in the overall toxic burden on the body. By eliminating the 900-degree exothermic combustion, you entirely eliminate the production of tar and carbon monoxide.
The two biggest killers.
Exactly. By removing those two specific byproducts, you're removing the primary chemical agents responsible for chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, emphysema, lung cancer, and acute cardiovascular failure. For a 2-pack-a-day smoker who switches entirely to a vape, their biometric markers for disease risk dropped dramatically within weeks.
I hear that 95% less harmful statistic, and on paper, it sounds like we solved the tobacco epidemic. But I want to introduce a major caveat here, something that moves beyond chemistry and into behavioral psychology.
I know exactly where you're going with this.
If you're listening, think about the ritual of a traditional combustible cigarette. It is essentially a ticking time bomb. You know exactly when the smoking session is over because the physical object burns down to the filter. It ceases to exist. You have to stub it out in an ashtray. You probably have to step outside into the freezing cold or the rain to smoke it. You have to worry about the pungent, lingering odor sticking to your hair and clothes. So maybe you spray some cologne or wash your hands before going back to your desk.
The cigarette has built-in environmental, social, and physical boundaries that naturally interrupt the consumption cycle.
Exactly. It creates natural friction. But a modern disposable vape is an endless, frictionless loop. There is no ash, there is no lighter, there is no pungent odor to give you away. And crucially, there is no physical end to the session.
It never burns out.
Right. The device just sits there, always ready. You can sit on your couch watching Netflix or sit at your office desk and just puff continuously for hours on end without ever breaking your concentration. Does this frictionless, boundaryless design accidentally trigger massive, unintentional overconsumption of nicotine?
You've hit on exactly what clinical behaviorists refer to as the frictionless addiction trap. When you strip away the social stigma, the smell, and the environmental barriers, users fundamentally change how they consume the drug. They transition from episodic use to what we call passive continuous puffing.
Passive continuous puffing.
Yeah. A traditional smoker might take 10 puffs over 5 minutes and then not smoke again for 2 hours. A vapor with a frictionless device might take hundreds of micropuffs continuously throughout the entire day. Because the nicotine salts are so smooth and the device is always in their hand, they are driving their daily baseline nicotine intake far, far beyond what a traditional heavy cigarette smoker could ever physically tolerate.
Wow. So we just established that this delivery system is frictionless, smooth-hitting, and highly potent. And that specific combination is exactly why the primary demographic using these devices has shifted so dramatically away from the adult quitters they were designed for and toward underage beginners.
And that's the tragedy.
Let's look at the pediatric impact because the numbers are really scary.
The youth epidemiological data is alarming. If we look at the Action on Smoking and Health's 2025 Smoke-Free GB Youth Survey, the numbers paint a stark picture. Roughly 20% of 11 to 17-year-olds in Great Britain admit to having tried vaping.
20%, 1 in 5 kids.
Yes, and the rates of current active vaping in that specific adolescent bracket have nearly doubled since 2019.
Doubled in half a decade. That brings us right back to the visual we started with, that 3D sculpture of the human brain sitting in Hertfordshire. It was designed by a 19-year-old 3D design student named Milena Melnichenko at Hertford Regional College.
It's brilliant art, honestly.
It is. She took 28,000 illegal vapes that had been seized from local teens by trading standards officers just this year. She arranged these thousands of brightly colored, candy-flavored plastic devices into anatomical slices of the human brain to highlight the sheer physical mass of the nicotine dependency epidemic in her peer group.
Powerful statement.
There's a devastating quote in the BBC News report covering the sculpture from a 17-year-old student named G. He said, "The amount of year 7 and 8 children who you see vaping outside school, they want to seem older and cooler. It's sad they're damaging their lungs to try to fit in."
It is deeply sad from a social perspective, but from a clinical neuroscience perspective, it is an active emergency. We need to dissect what that massive influx of nicotine salts is actually doing to the cellular architecture of a year 7 or year 8 brain.
I want to visualize this for the listener. We have a 13-year-old whose prefrontal cortex is basically an active construction zone. It's not finished being built. So when they inhale these high-strength nicotine salts, it's not just creating a bad psychological habit, right? Is the chemical literally derailing the biological construction process itself?
That is the perfect way to conceptualize it.
Yeah.
The adolescent central nervous system is in a state of intensive structural maturation. It is actively pruning inefficient synapses and heavily reinforcing the neural pathways it believes are most essential for survival. The prefrontal cortex, the specific region of the brain responsible for high-level executive functioning, complex impulse control, logical risk assessment, and emotional regulation, is the absolute last section of the brain to fully mature. It does not finish organizing its neural wiring until roughly age 25.
Until you're 25. So the command center is still waiting for the drywall to be put up, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And into that fragile construction zone, the teenager introduces a massive recurring dose of protonated nicotine salts. To understand the damage, you have to look at the receptors. Nicotine acts as an exogenous analog to a critical, naturally occurring neurotransmitters in the human brain called acetylcholine.
Okay, let's use an analogy here to break that down. If natural acetylcholine is like a controlled trickle of water from a faucet that the brain uses to keep you moderately alert and focused.
Then nicotine salts act like a high-pressure fire hose blasting directly through the window. The nicotine molecule is shaped just similarly enough to acetylcholine that it binds directly to the brain's nicotinic receptors.
It tricks the brain.
It does. And when it binds, it forcefully triggers a massive artificial flood of dopamine directly into the nucleus accumbens, which is the brain's core reward and pleasure center.
Okay, dopamine flood.
Right. In a fully developed adult brain, this artificial dopamine flood creates a stubborn physical addiction. But in a developing adolescent brain, that same flood causes a phenomenon known as aberrant synaptic formation.
Aberrant synaptic formation. Okay, break the biology of that down for me. How does a chemical vapor actually change physical architecture?
Because the adolescent brain is highly neuroplastic, meaning it easily molds itself to its environment, it reacts to this extreme artificial dopamine flood defensively. High-dose nicotine exposure literally alters the epigenetic expression of the genes involved in creating new synapses.
Wait, so it changes how the genes express themselves?
Yes, the brain assumes this massive influx of dopamine is the new normal. So to handle the fire hose, the brain forcefully constructs abnormal neural pathways. It physically wires the child's brain to heavily prioritize immediate, intense chemical rewards over long-term, sustained executive function.
Oh my God.
It structurally handicaps the prefrontal cortex. This creates permanent, measurable deficits in sustained attention, it degrades working memory, and significantly lowers the teenager's baseline for impulse control. By altering this architecture so early, it makes that specific adolescent vastly more vulnerable to severe substance abuse disorders with harder drugs later in adulthood.
That is horrifying. You aren't just picking up a habit, you are structurally handicapping the biological hardware of your future self.
Well said.
But here is the disconnect. When you interview these kids or read the surveys about why they vape, they almost never say, I'm looking for a massive dopamine rush. They universally claim they are doing it for stress relief.
Yes, the stress myth.
The BBC article featured a 19-year-old named Roxana who explicitly stated she used her vapes to deal with the intense stress of college exams and to help her relax after a long day.
And that profound misunderstanding is the great illusion of pediatric nicotine addiction. The stress relief that Roxana and millions of other teenagers feel is a complete biologically manufactured myth.
Walk me through that.
If we break down the neurochemical loop of vaping, it happens in a very predictable 5-step cycle. Step 1. The teenager experiences baseline environmental stress. They have an upcoming math exam, or they're dealing with social anxiety in the cafeteria.
Real-life teen stress. Got it.
Step 2. Feeling overwhelmed, they take a deep inhalation hit from their vape. Step 3. The nicotine hits the brain in seconds, the dopamine forcefully releases, and the teenager experiences a momentary, genuine sense of chemical euphoria and calm.
So in their mind, cause and effect is established immediately. I was stressed, I hit the vape, now I feel calm. The vape cured my stress.
Exactly. But they don't realize what happens in step 4. Rapid nicotine clearance. The human body metabolizes and clears nicotine incredibly quickly. Within an hour or two, the blood plasma levels plummet and acute chemical withdrawal begins.
Already, just an hour or two.
It's just an hour or two.
Yeah.
And this triggers step 5. Amplified systemic anxiety. The physical withdrawal from that massive nicotine salt dose triggers intense irritability, physical restlessness, a lack of focus, and deeply heightened anxiety. The withdrawal is so uncomfortable that it forces the teenager to take the next puff, just to alleviate the terrible feeling and get back to their baseline.
Wow.
So the relief a teenager feels when they hit the vape isn't the cessation of their exam stress. It is simply the momentary, artificial cessation of their own chemically induced nicotine withdrawal.
The vape didn't cure their stress.
No, the vape caused the severe physiological stress they're now desperately trying to medicate.
It's a manufactured disease perfectly selling its own temporary hourly cure. And what's worse is that the delivery systems for this chemical loop are evolving to become even stealthier. Like, a recent research paper from the University of Stirling highlighted an alarming new shift away from vapor entirely toward highly unregulated nicotine pouches.
Oh, yes. These are frequently referred to by the teens in the studies as smenis, or upper deckies.
Upper deckies, yeah. The Stirling study is shocking. They found that 14 to 16-year-olds in Scotland are using these little white pouches discreetly, tucking them into their upper lips right in the middle of class, right under the noses of teachers who have absolutely no idea it's happening because there is no vapor cloud to give them away.
It's totally invisible to the teacher.
Completely. But the physical toll is acute and immediate. The study documented kids reporting severe, localized gum pain, burning sensations in the mouth, intense nausea, cold sweats, and instances of teenagers literally fainting in the middle of the school hallway from nicotine overdose.
The physical rejection by the body is intense, and yet the behavioral compulsion to continue using them overrides the pain.
Which perfectly illustrates the grip of the addiction. There is a quote from a male student in that Stirling study that just stopped me cold. When asked about the damage the pouches were doing to his mouth, he casually replied, "I'd rather have worse gums than worse lungs."
That is a staggering rationale from a child.
I'd push back on our whole public health approach when I read something like that. I mean, how do we even begin to combat this twisted internal logic? You have kids literally bargaining away pieces of their own biology, accepting rotting gum tissue and public fainting spells because they fundamentally misunderstand the holistic dangers of the chemical they are ingesting.
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, that, quote, highlights a catastrophic failure in how we communicate public health data to adolescents. These teenagers are overhearing the adult harm reduction debate.
Right. They hear us say it's safer than smoking.
They hear the clinical adults saying that non-combustible nicotine is safer than smoking tobacco. But the teenagers are incorrectly applying that adult harm reduction logic to their own clean slates.
They're starting from zero.
Exactly. They are failing to realize that introducing any highly concentrated, unregulated neurotoxin into developing tissue, whether you absorb it through the delicate tissue of the lungs or the mucosal membranes of the gums, causes permanent architectural damage. There is no safe biological bargain to be made here for a 15-year-old. Choosing gum rot over lung damage is a false dichotomy created by a severe lack of education.
It's a tragic misunderstanding, and despite that student's misguided belief that his lungs are safe because he's using a pouch, the vast majority of kids are still vaping, and their lungs are absolutely not escaping this unscathed. Let's move below the neck and look at the physical trauma happening inside the respiratory system.
It's grim.
If you are listening to this, think about how carefully you prepare your food. You probably rinse your apples in the sink. You scrub your vegetables to avoid ingesting trace amounts of agricultural pesticides. Why then are millions of otherwise health-conscious people willingly inhaling a heated, entirely unregulated chemical cocktail from a counterfeit plastic device they bought for $5 at a corner shop?
It comes back to the biological disconnect we mentioned earlier regarding tropylene glycol and vegetable glycerin. The general public equates safe to eat with safe to breathe, which we know is completely false.
Completely. When you eat a strawberry-flavored gummy bear, your stomach attacks it with hydrochloric acid that has a pH of 1.5. Your digestive enzymes violently break down those complex synthetic flavor aldehydes into harmless waste safely.
The stomach is built for it.
Right. The human lung completely lacks these aggressive protective mechanisms. The lungs are comprised of an incredibly delicate, single-cell thick membrane that evolved over millions of years to do exactly one thing: process clean, ambient atmospheric air.
So when you take those heavy synthetic food-grade flavorings, boil them at 200 degrees Celsius and draw them deep into that delicate membrane.
But the chemicals undergo intense thermal degradation, and the results are devastating. Let's look at a specific compound: diacetyl.
Diacetyl, okay. It's a chemical commonly used in the food industry to give microwave popcorn, margarines, and candies a rich, buttery, or creamy flavor profile. When you eat it, it's harmless. But when diacetyl, or its chemical cousins like acetone, are vaporized and hit the delicate epithelial lining of the bronchioles, the tiniest branches of the airway inside the lung, they trigger profound, localized chemical burns and intense inflammation.
Diacetyl is the chemical directly linked to the condition known as popcorn lung, correct?
Yes, the clinical term is bronchiolitis obliterans. It earned the nickname popcorn lung after a severe outbreak of lung disease among factory workers at a microwave popcorn plant who were inhaling massive ambient amounts of aerosolized diacetyl fumes.
What does that actually do to the lung?
When the diacetyl burns the bronchioles, the body tries to heal the damage by laying down scar tissue. This scarring causes the lung tissue to become highly fibrotic and stiff. It physically narrows and permanently blocks the smallest airways. The patient slowly suffocates because they can't expel air. It is an irreversible, debilitating disease. Once that scarring develops, there is no cure short of a total lung transplant.
It's terrifying that a chemical causing that level of permanent destruction is used just to make a vapor taste like vanilla custard, and the American Lung Association white paper points out that diacetyl isn't the only threat. They note that many e-cigarettes also emit a chemical called acrolein.
Acrolein is deeply concerning. It is a toxic chemical primarily utilized industrially as an agricultural herbicide. It is literally sprayed to kill weeds.
A weed killer.
Yes. It is also a well-known, highly irritating byproduct of burning organic matter, including traditional cigarettes. But we are finding it in vape aerosol as well, generated when the glycerin base thermally decomposes. Chronic inhalation of acrolein can cause acute lung injury, severe chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and is suspected to cause asthma and eventually lung cancer.
You are inhaling heated weed killer into the deepest recesses of your lungs. It's unbelievable that this is unregulated. And while popcorn lung and COPD develop over years of chronic use, we also have to talk about the acute sudden crises, the things that put a healthy teenager in the ICU overnight. I'm talking about the EVALI outbreak.
EVALI is a stark example of what happens when the black market corrupts a massive, unregulated supply chain. EVALI stands for e-cigarette or vaping product use-associated lung injury.
I remember this in the news, summer of 2019, right?
Yes, in the summer of 2019, the United States medical system saw a sudden, terrifying, and completely unexplained surge of young, previously perfectly healthy people arriving in emergency rooms in acute respiratory distress. Their lungs were simply shutting down.
The numbers were grim. The CDC recorded over 2,800 severe hospitalizations and 68 confirmed agonizing deaths across the U.S. What was the actual chemical culprit that caused lungs to fail so rapidly?
Epidemic investigators finally traced the massive outbreak to a specific chemical compound, vitamin E acetate.
Why was a vitamin in a vape?
To understand why it was there, you have to look at the illicit market dynamics. Vitamin E acetate is a thick, sticky lipid and oil. Illicit manufacturers operating in the black market THC, or cannabis, vape supply chain, realized that vitamin E acetate looked and flowed exactly like high-quality THC oil. Because it was incredibly cheap, they started cutting it into their illicit vape cartridges to dilute the expensive THC and maximize their profit margins.
So they were watering down the product with a vitamin oil to make more money. Why is that lethal?
Because introducing any heavy oil into the lungs causes lipoid pneumonia. The lungs cannot absorb or expel heavy lipids. They just coat the alveoli and suffocate the tissue. But it gets worse.
How does it get worse?
When vitamin E acetate is actively heated by the metallic coil inside a vape device, the thermal energy violently shears the lipid molecules apart. This specific thermal degradation undergoes a chemical reaction that produces ketone gas.
Ketone gas.
Ketone is an incredibly reactive, highly toxic gas. When these users inhaled the ketone gas produced by the boiling vitamin E acetate, it caused catastrophic, widespread damage to the alveolar cells, leading to massive internal fluid buildup and rapid, fatal respiratory failure.
It's a terrifying lesson in the extreme dangers of counterfeits and the black market. Because the legal market expanded so rapidly, the regulatory framework couldn't keep up. Now the black market is rushing in to fill the massive demand for cheap, flavored disposables.
Which is exactly the battle trading standards officers are fighting daily. When you buy an unregulated, illicit vape, like any one of the 28,000 seized in that Herefordshire sculpture, you have absolutely no idea what you're inhaling.
It's a total gamble.
It is. These illicit manufacturers use the absolute cheapest, lowest grade internal components available to maximize profit. As the cheap canthal or nickel chromium coils rapidly heat up and cool down thousands of times, the metal itself degrades. It begins to leach heavy metals like nickel, chromium, tin, and lead directly into the e-liquid and the resulting aerosol.
Lead. You're inhaling lead.
Yes. The user is unknowingly inhaling ultra-fine, toxic, heavy metal particulates deep into their lung tissue, causing severe, localized cytotoxic damage. Furthermore, laboratory tests routinely show that these illicit products blatantly lie on their packaging regarding nicotine concentrations and frequently contain highly restricted or totally banned chemical substances.
It is the darkest side of a rapidly scaling technology. When the hardware and the consumer demand wildly outpace the government regulatory framework, the black market eagerly fills the void, and the end consumer, who is all too often a naive teenager, unknowingly acts as the crash test dummy for a toxicological experiment.
It's an experiment on a global scale.
And as devastating as this is to human tissue, the physical dangers of these illicit, mass-produced cheap vapes aren't just limited to the inside of the human body. The physical devices themselves, powered by cheap, volatile batteries, are causing catastrophic, explosive damage to the physical environment and to innocent bystanders. Which takes us to a very specific incident in Glasgow, Scotland, March 8th, 2026.
It is a profound, incredibly destructive case study in the collateral damage of this unregulated hardware.
So picture the scene. It's a quiet Sunday afternoon. A passerby named Lamine Kongira is walking down Union Street, right in the heart of the city, directly next to Glasgow Central Station, which happens to be the busiest and most critical railway station in all of Scotland.
Right.
As he's walking, he hears a shopkeeper run out into the street screaming, "Fire! Fire!" Kongira, acting heroically, runs straight into this small, unassuming vape shop called Scott's World. He looks behind the counter and he sees an adapter charging system full of chargers spontaneously bursting into intense flames.
Terrifying.
He grabs a fire extinguisher and tries to fight it, but the heat is too intense. He has to drop the extinguisher and sprint for his life when he hears the secondary mass inventory of lithium batteries inside the cheap vapes start exploding like shrapnel.
What he witnessed was a localized thermal runaway chain reaction.
Explain thermal runaway to me, because it sounds like something out of a nuclear reactor. Why do these tiny batteries explode with enough force to level a building?
Inside every disposable vape is a small lithium-ion battery. They work by moving lithium ions between an anode and a cathode through a liquid electrolyte, separated by a microscopically thin piece of porous plastic.
Okay. Pretty standard battery tech.
Right. But in cheap, unregulated mass-produced vapes, manufacturing defects are rampant. Microscopic metal fragments or structural weaknesses can cause tiny crystal structures, called dendrites, to form inside the battery.
Dendrites?
Yes. If a dendrite pierces that thin plastic separator, it creates an immediate internal short circuit. The short circuit releases immense, instantaneous thermal energy. It heats up so fast that the highly flammable liquid electrolyte inside the battery actively boils and ignites.
Oh, wow.
And this massive release of heat triggers the exact same failure in the batteries sitting next to it on the shelf, creating an unstoppable cascading chain reaction of violent explosions and chemical fires that are notoriously difficult to extinguish with water.
And the resulting devastation in Glasgow was absolute. More than 250 firefighters rushed to the scene and battled the chemical blaze for 24 continuous hours. The fire completely gutted and destroyed Union Corner, an iconic 1851 Victorian stone building that actually predated the train station itself.
Just wiped out over a century of history.
The structural integrity failed, and the Victorian facade literally collapsed into the street. The smoke and danger were so severe that Glasgow Central Station had to be completely evacuated and entirely shut down for days, severing commuter lines and causing massive nationwide rail disruption, all because of a $5 piece of plastic on a charger.
It's hard to wrap your head around.
But what compounds the tragedy of the destroyed heritage building is the subsequent investigation into how this shop was operating.
The investigation revealed a shocking systemic regulatory failure at the local level.
Total failure. Investigative journalists at the Ferret dug into the public records and uncovered that this specific shop, Scott's World, was not even legally registered to sell vaping products in Scotland. It was a ghost business. They hadn't paid any business rates to the city.
Wow.
The local council admitted they hadn't performed a single health, safety, or trading standards check on the premises for 2 full years leading up to the catastrophic blaze. Why? Because severe local authority budget cuts had completely hollowed out the enforcement departments. They had halved the number of active trading standards officers. The city simply didn't have the manpower or the funding to monitor these pop-up shops flooding the streets.
That's the real problem, isn't it?
The previous owner of the shop even told reporters he had no idea selling vapes required any sort of legal registration. I look at this incident and I'd argue it points out the incredible, terrifying fragility of modern infrastructure. Think about the scale of this. A tiny, unregistered, illicit pop-up shop selling strawberry-flavored USB sticks managed to burn a historic 1851 Victorian building to the ground and paralyze a nation's vital rail network simply because of a lethal combination of cheap, volatile lithium batteries and absolute zero safety oversight.
It is the ultimate catastrophic example of the enforcement gap. You can pass all the stringent safety regulations and age restrictions you want, but rules on paper mean absolutely nothing if trading standards officers lack the budget, the personnel, and the legal teeth to physically enter the shops and enforce them. The black market thrives in that bureaucratic blind spot.
It really does.
And the collateral damage isn't just massive structural fires. The quiet daily environmental toll of the hardware is creating a slow-motion ecological disaster.
The numbers on the e-waste are hard to comprehend. The UK Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs conducted a study and estimated that prior to the upcoming legislative bans, an astonishing 5 million disposable vapes were being thrown away into the general trash every single week in the UK alone.
And remember the anatomy of the device. Every single one of those 5 million disposables contains a non-removable lithium battery, heavy metals from the coil, and chemical-soaked plastic.
And they just go straight to the dump.
Yes. When they are crushed in landfills, those batteries fracture, actively leaching highly toxic lithium, corrosive battery acid, and heavy metals directly into the groundwater and soil, while the plastic casings break down into pervasive microplastic pollution. It is an environmental nightmare disguised as convenience.
And beyond the plastic waste, we have to consider the environmental impact of the vapor cloud itself. We are seeing a massive shift in how society views secondhand aerosol. The UK government is pushing forward a new law explicitly banning vaping in cars carrying anyone under the age of 18 in England, directly expanding the landmark 2015 smoking ban.
That legislation is driven by emerging clinical evidence demonstrating that secondhand vapor and emissions from heated tobacco products pose distinct, measurable respiratory health risks to bystanders, particularly to the developing lungs of children trapped in small, unventilated, enclosed spaces like a car.
So if we pull back and look at the whole board, we have teenagers passing out from nicotine pouches in middle schools, historic Victorian buildings burning to the ground from battery explosions, black markets flooding the streets with heavy metals, and millions of toxic lithium batteries being dumped into landfills weekly.
It's chaos.
Given all of that chaos, global lawmakers have finally recognized the crisis and decided enough is enough. We are entering an era of severe, unprecedented legislative crackdown.
Governments worldwide are desperately scrambling to catch up to a technology that outpaced them a decade ago. It is creating a frantic, highly fragmented global landscape.
Let's take a quick world tour of this global patchwork of vape laws, because where you live completely dictates your reality.
It varies wildly, from total prohibition to chaotic free markets. In countries with stricter, centralized public health mandates like Australia, Thailand, India, and Brazil, vapes are completely and utterly banned.
Just banned outright.
Outright. The commercial sale, importation, and in some jurisdictions like Thailand, even the personal possession of a vape is strictly prohibited and carries severe legal penalties.
But then you look at the United States. If you walk into a gas station in America, you see walls covered in brightly colored flavored vapes. It looks like a free-for-all, but technically the vast majority of them are illegal.
Yes. The U.S. market is an incredibly complex, massive gray market. The federal regulatory body, the FDA, requires manufacturers to navigate an agonizingly slow, expensive process called the Pre-Market Tobacco Product Application, or PMTA.
What does that involve?
Companies have to submit millions of pages of toxicological data, proving their specific device is a net benefit to public health. To date, the FDA has authorized very, very few products, and almost exclusively traditional tobacco and menthol flavors manufactured by massive, well-funded tobacco conglomerates. They have systematically denied thousands of applications for sweet, fruit-flavored products.
But they're still on the shelves everywhere.
Because federal enforcement at the retail level has been incredibly inconsistent and poorly funded. So a massive black market of unauthorized imported disposables has flooded U.S. shelves. Frustrated by the federal bottleneck, individual U.S. states have stepped in, creating a deeply confusing, fragmented web of state-level flavor bans, localized taxes, and mandatory retail directory laws.
It sounds like total regulatory chaos. What is the approach in the European Union?
The EU is heavily structured. They operate under the Broad Tobacco Products Directive. A new iteration, TBD3, is pending, which will likely severely restrict flavor profiles and mandate plain packaging. More impactfully, there is a separate sweeping EU-wide environmental mandate set to take effect by February 2027. This law will completely ban the sale of any electronic device, including disposable vapes, that does not feature a consumer replaceable battery.
Oh, that's specifically targeted to stop the lithium e-waste crisis.
Exactly.
But of all the global players, the United Kingdom is currently taking perhaps the most aggressive, sweeping, and comprehensive legislative stance of all. Let's dig into the UK laws because they are rewriting the playbook. The Tobacco and Vapes Act 2026 received royal assent this past April. It introduces a radical concept, a rolling smoke-free generation.
It's a fascinating legal concept.
It means that anyone born after a specific, legally defined date will never, for the rest of their lives, be legally allowed to purchase combustible tobacco in the UK. But regarding vapes specifically, the hammer comes down hard and fast on June 1st, 2025. That date triggers a total UK-wide ban on the retail sale and supply of all disposable, single-use vapes.
It was a massive market intervention.
Yeah.
And they are following up the outright bans with severe financial penalties. The UK government is introducing the Vaping Products Duty, a brand new, dedicated excise tax taking effect on October 1st, 2026. This legislation specifically taxes all e-liquid based purely on volume, levying a duty of £2.20 per 10 milliliters of liquid, regardless of what's in it.
Now, I have to heavily push back on this specific tax policy. I was reading through the industry analysis and the outcry from cessation advocates regarding what they called the short fill paradox.
Yeah, the math gets very tricky here.
If the UK government's clearly stated primary goal is to protect youth and to use taxation to financially price teenagers out of the vaping market, this volume-based tax seems structurally backwards. It seems completely counterintuitive to the stated mission.
Break down the mechanics of the paradox for us. Why is the volume metric problematic?
It comes down to how different demographics use the liquid. The tax is calculated exclusively on the volume of the liquid, completely ignoring the actual nicotine strength.
Right.
Dedicated adult hobbyists, the people who are actively trying to titrate their nicotine levels down to stay off combustible cigarettes, often use what are called short fills. A short fill is a large 100 milliliter bottle of cheap, zero nicotine flavored liquid. The adult buys this bulk liquid and then manually mixes in their own tiny measured shots of raw nicotine to create a weak, customized blend for a large, refillable device.
Which is a lot of work.
Yes. Teenagers absolutely do not do this. It is too messy, it requires too much math, and it requires a bulky, expensive, highly visible, refillable mod. Teenagers use stealthy, tiny 2-milliliter pre-filled pod devices that are absolutely packed with massive 20-milligram concentrations of nicotine salts.
The consumption habits are diametrically opposed.
Exactly. But under this blunt, volume-based tax scheme, the adult's 100-milliliter bottle of zero nicotine short fill faces a massive, punitive 147% price hike. They are hit with an extra 22 pounds in duty alone, simply because the bottle is physically large.
Wow.
Meanwhile, the teenager's highly addictive tiny 2-milliliter pod only sees a minuscule 44p duty added, which is roughly a negligible 7% retail increase. I look at this math and I have to ask, why does a tax ostensibly designed to protect youth effectively punish the adult who is genuinely trying to quit smoking while barely raising the price on the exact high-strength stealth devices that kids are hiding in their sleeves?
This raises an important question, and you've highlighted a profound structural flaw in the legislation. It undeniably exposes the clumsy reality of governments attempting to legislate a highly adaptable, rapidly moving technology.
It's just so frustrating to see policy miss the mark like that.
If we look at the rationale from the Treasury's perspective, volume-based taxation is a blunt instrument, but it's chosen for administrative efficiency. It is significantly easier and cheaper for customs agents to visually measure the milliliter volume of a bottle than it is to mandate expensive, complex laboratory mass spectrometry testing to police the exact nicotine concentrations across thousands of imported, frequently mislabeled black market brands.
Okay, I guess from a logistical standpoint, I see why they did it.
Furthermore, the tax is a Trojan horse to establish a mandatory supply chain tracking system. By April 2027, all retailers will face mandatory, physically traceable duty stamps on products to help aggressively kill the black market. But you were absolutely correct in your analysis. The unavoidable collateral damage of such a blunt, volume-based tax is that it disproportionately penalizes the bulk consumer, who is statistically the adult trying to achieve harm reduction.
It is deeply frustrating when the policy doesn't match the pathology. But regardless of the structural flaws in the tax laws, the clinical reality on the ground remains unchanged. Millions of teenagers are currently deeply chemically addicted to nicotine salts, and we need to talk about how they can actually quit. Because we know from decades of child psychology that yelling at them, grounding them, or confiscating the devices clearly does not work.
No, applying aggressive punitive punishment or relying on shame backfires completely in addiction treatment. It simply forces the adolescent to hide the behavior better and isolates them from support. The modern clinical playbook for youth cessation requires us to treat this not as a behavioral discipline issue, but as a complex chemical dependency problem. It requires a patient sequential protocol.
I want to make this highly actionable for our listeners. If a parent, a teacher, or even an older sibling is listening to this deep dive right now, what is the exact protocol they should follow?
The protocol begins with de-escalation. First, you must establish a judgment-free baseline. You cannot confront them while they are actively vaping or in a state of high stress. Open a calm dialogue during a neutral, low-stress period like during a car ride or while cooking dinner. Ask objective, non-accusatory questions about how vaping physically makes them feel, focusing on the negative physical side effects they might be noticing, like shortness of breath or anxiety.
Just getting them to talk about it, honestly.
Exactly. Second, you have to help them identify their specific environmental and emotional triggers. You need to map the habit. Are they vaping primarily to fit in socially with a specific group of friends? Or are they hiding in their room, aggressively self-medicating academic stress and anxiety?
Okay, map the triggers.
Third, once the triggers are mapped, you collaboratively formulate if-then action scripts.
Give me a concrete example of an if-then script. How does that interrupt the loop?
An if-then script pre-programs a behavioral substitute before the craving strikes. For example, if I feel overwhelmed while studying late at night and my brain demands dopamine, then I will immediately chew a piece of intense cinnamon gum instead of reaching for my vape.
You are giving the brain an alternative, pre-approved pathway to channel the anxious energy.
The sources provided some fascinating, highly specific tactile substitutes that go beyond just chewing gum. Because the physical hand-to-mouth fixation of vaping is almost as addictive as the chemical itself, right? Yes, the tactile and sensory rituals are deeply ingrained. Clinical research shows that nicotine cravings do not last forever. They peak in short, intense, overwhelming windows, usually 3 to 5 minutes. You can successfully disrupt that specific neural pathway by overwhelming the sensory system with a harmless alternative. We call them taste shockers.
Taste shockers.
When the craving peaks, the teen shocks their palate with incredibly intense flavors. Eating a Warhead sour candy, chewing an intense cinnamon toothpick, or dissolving a strong, icy menthol lozenge. The intense sensory input acts as a circuit breaker for the brain's craving loop.
Oh, I like that. Circuit breaker.
Another highly effective specific physical workaround involves using a hard-sided water bottle with a narrow straw top. When the teen feels the urge to hit a vape, they instead draw ice-cold water forcefully up through the narrow straw. The physics of drawing the heavy liquid through the tight straw safely perfectly replicates the physical diaphragmatic breathing resistance and the hand-to-mouth kinetics of taking a heavy vape hit. The deep breathing, combined with the cold water hitting the vagus nerve in the back of the throat, naturally calms the central nervous system without any chemicals.
That is incredibly practical biological advice. The straw trick is genius. And we also have to acknowledge the reality of how teens communicate. They often don't want to sit in a circle in a school gymnasium and talk to an adult counselor about their feelings. There is digital support available, right?
Absolutely. Clinical trials overwhelmingly show that teens respond far better to anonymous, text-based, peer-driven interventions. The Truth Initiative runs an incredibly successful free national program called This Is Quitting. Teens can simply text the word vape-free to the number 88709 to enroll.
That's great.
It provides them with anonymous, peer-vetted coping strategies and real-time support right on their phones where they live. Additionally, the National Cancer Institute and the FDA offer the Quit Start mobile app, which actively tracks their emotional triggers and offers gamified distractions and breathing exercises during acute craving spikes.
Wow. If I take a step back, we have covered an immense, almost overwhelming amount of ground today.
You really have.
We have taken a journey that started with Herbert A. Gilbert's forgotten mid-century scrap metal dreams of rum-flavored vapor in a Pennsylvania garage in 1963. We trace the technology through Honnolik's tragic, grief-inspired nightmare of drowning, straight into the aggressive corporate boardrooms of Juul, and down into the filthy black market factories pumping out unregulated heavy metals.
It's been a wild ride.
We've seen 28,000 illegal vapes seized by police and turned into a massive sculpture of the very teenage brains they are actively rewiring. We watched a historic 1851 Victorian building burn to the ground in Glasgow because of an unregulated lithium battery explosion, and we tracked a sweeping, desperate international legal crackdown ranging from the UK's disposable ban to the complex U.S. state flavor laws.
It is a profound, incredibly rapid technological and epidemiological shift. And we have to hold two conflicting truths in our minds simultaneously. Vapes are undeniably a vital, highly effective, and necessary lifeboat for heavily dependent adult smokers who are actively drowning in the lethal tar and carbon monoxide of combustible cigarettes.
But they're also a deeply dangerous, totally frictionless trap for a developing adolescent brain.
The duality of the device is the defining public health challenge of our era.
As we bring this deep dive to a close, I want to leave you, the listener, with one final, lingering concept to mull over as you go about your day.
I'm curious what this is.
Think back to the very beginning of our conversation, to that broken X-ray machine and the murky, confusing diagnostic landscape we find ourselves in. For over a century, humanity suffered the horrific, devastating consequences of combustible cigarettes. We lost tens of millions of lives. But because of that immense, tragic passage of time, we now possess mountains of historical, multi-decade population data detailing exactly, on a cellular level, how traditional smoking kills us. The cigarette is a known, quantified enemy.
We know exactly what it does.
Exactly. But vaping is entirely new. There is no multi-decade data. There are no 50-year longitudinal studies. Right now, as we speak, millions of teenagers and young adults across the globe, legally and illegally puffing on synthetic nicotine salts and aerosolized candy flavors, are unknowingly acting as the biological test subjects in the largest unregulated real-time clinical trial in human history.
That's a sobering thought.
When this current generation hits middle age, when that proverbial X-ray machine finally powers up 20 or 30 years from now and we can actually see the long-term cellular damage, what exactly will the data reveal?
That is the multi-billion-dollar question, and we are all waiting for the answer.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking hard questions, keep looking past the bright packaging, and as always, keep exploring the world around you.